You see, something is going to happen. Something wonderful.
My God, it's full of stars.
Welcome to the Occult Rejects. On this episode, we are finally wrapping up this 5-part series, The Temple of Solomon, with our man Robby Marx. I'm sure everybody here already knows who he is, but in case this is their first time listening to the show, Robby, would you like to let everybody know who you are and what your deal is?
Yeah, I'm an artist, and I like to spend my spare time like researching into abstract topics through history and kind of piecing that all together. If you want to hear more of what I do, I have my MetaMindcast, but you can find all my links at Linktree, RMARX, all one word, and that'll give you all my links.
Awesome, that's great. And I got co-hosting with me. I got Teresa. What is going on, Teresa? How are you? The spiritual gangster herself.
I am well. Thank you for having me back for my favorite of the Occult Rejects, Robby Marx story time.
Yes, of course, you're right. Yes.
It's my fave.
Did you want to plug your show, or actually, if you don't mind, I'd put you on the spot. Do you want to maybe explain just what's going on with it?
Sure, yeah. So obviously we have another show, The Spiritual Gangsters. For a while, been doing the Clown World Weekly kind of like news roundup segment. I'm just like taking a break from that right now, just because I feel like I don't want to focus on like the world so much, if that makes sense. Yeah, just like pumping the brakes on that for a bit. But the show's not ending or anything like that. Just I have to like scale back on like making content and stuff because, you know, I'm a busy mom and I can't have my head stuck in my phone like all the time. So yeah, it's a hard balance, right?
Yeah.
I think everyone feels that in this like truther game. It's like
Sure.
you know, it's a fine line to walk sometimes.
I don't think I'd be doing this with 2 kids, so I mean, I give you credit.
Right?
I'm totally honest with you.
Thanks. I don't think, some people do, I think, but mostly it's men for a reason, I think. But
Oh, yeah. Well, I do always give women credit when it comes to true crime and certain stuff. I still think women kill it with that shit. I think they're by far better than men.
yeah, no,
So-
I just mean in terms of like maybe like responsibility load of like things that are not always in your control. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, it's a combination of factors, but yeah, just wanted to step away from that a little bit.
That's actually a good point, though, because a lot of podcasters that I know that do have kids, whenever I record with them at night, it's always after they've kind of like had dinner and the kid now goes with the mother, and then they go and record. So I guess I see what you're saying.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's just, you know, this natural diffusion of responsibilities most of the time, but yeah, it's all good.
But yeah, definitely look forward to whatever you decide to do. I'm sure we'll continue to do something.
Yeah, I'm still going to continue with stuff, just be a little less frequent and maybe a different focus. Yeah.
Oh, and what about the Midnight Mysteries?
Oh, yeah, sorry. So, woo. Yeah, I do also co-host on another Canadian podcast called Midnight Mysteries with Nathan Zieber. He is a really cool, interesting guy, Christian pastor, but he also has like a keen interest in cryptids and like aliens and stuff. So it's a really interesting show. I'm on like one of their specific segments, so it's not like the main show all the time. It's called Things That Go Bump in the Night. So yeah, so far we've talked about like sleep paralysis. What's the other one? Oh, the Mothman.
Yeah.
That just came out. That was cool.
That stuff is interesting.
Yes.
All right, yeah, and I will have your links down there on the bottom anyway, as
Thank
well
you.
as Robby's. All of his stuff will be in the bottom as usual.
Thanks so much.
All right, so that's enough out of us. That's enough of our chit chat, and back to Robby and story time. So,
All right. So
take us away, Robby.
Last time we got up to Isaac Luria, right? The Kabbalah of Isaac Luria. And Isaac Luria is considered to be the father of Kabbalah. He's a rabbi. And he kind of used prophecy in a Machiavellian manner. He basically saying, you don't wait for the Messiah. You bring about the conditions for the Messiah. So when we get into this whole idea, like, you know, we always say, oh, they're playing a script. they're like they're using the Bible as a script to try to bring about these end times, right? This directly relates to the idea of him saying you don't wait for the Messiah, you create the conditions for the Messiah. So you start to have these developing sects of Christians, Jews that begin to and we'll get into Zabbatai Zevi here in just a second,
Nice.
but doing things to try to bring about the return of the Messiah, right? So let's see, then in that was 1572, we have the rise of the Kabbalah of Isaac Luria. Then in 1587, King Philip II, he joined the office of the Grand Master of the Templars with that of the crown. So basically linking the Templars with the crown, right? And then in 1614 to 1616, German occultists begin the writings of the Rosicrucians, right? And that's kind of important because we're going to see that the ideas of Zabbatai Zevi start to circulate amongst the Rosicrucians as well. And some even say that the ideas of Zevi came out of Rosicrucianism, especially when you get into the idea that Zevi is said to be a friend of the English, which is an interesting, tie in regard to politics, So then in 1623, Francis Bacon writes The New Atlantis. I'm just throwing some of this stuff in here for context as we move, because these are ideas that are going to inflect upon how the future kind of rolls in, right? And then in 1666, we have the rise of the ideas of Zabbatai Zevi. Now, do you guys know who Zabbatai Zevi is?
Yes.
I have heard the name, yes.
You've heard the name? Okay.
Yes.
So
he's like a hot topic again right now. I even posted yesterday that I did a podcast like 2 years ago with Kojak, because like lately, whenever I open up Twitter, it's like I'm seeing a post by somebody blaming something on the Frankists again.
Yeah.
I'm like, is that, I guess that's the new fall guy, because like some popular channel must have covered it. And now everybody's like, oh, that's a new hit word. And it's like, you got to catch up. That was 2 years ago.
Right.
But I have noticed it's popping up again. People's interest.
This stuff has been hotly debated for hundreds of years in certain circles, but that's the whole thing. When you walk down this whole conspiratorial line and you start running into these things in history, the conspiracy theorist, I think, over the long term is really just someone who has like gone through and assimilated and started to piece through all this information and drawing the puzzle together. And I think that's important, especially with the current state of what we're dealing with in Israel right now, which is why when we started talking about this, I don't know, 4 or 6 months ago, doing this series. And I didn't realize how much time I was going to end up like obsessively going, because I, every night, for months now, I've just been going through this stuff, and this story is so large, like trying to tailor it down to just 5 episodes, and still get to the point. It's a lot of information for sure. So Zabbatai Zevi, right? He basically looked at the idea of redemption through sin. So you could basically, the more sin you created, the faster the Messiah was going to come back, the faster the heavenly kingdom was going to return, because we were in such a lowly state that, the Godhead himself would want to rise us back up, right? So then in, let's see, I'll just go ahead and. So Zabbatai Zevi, redemption through sin. He ordered everyone to sin to bring back the Messiah. And this messianic or Masonic longing, right? Some historians say that there were over 100 different messiahs within Judaism coming up through, right? And I found easily 15, or more. Some of these messiahs, including accepted and rejected, Jesus of Nazareth. And then there was Dositos, the Samothracian, who wished to persuade the Samothracians that he was the Jewish Messiah. Simon Bar Kokhba, who we talked about as the military general. And then there's Shlomo Molicho, 1500. He was his parents were Christian converts in Lisbon, and he went to Jerusalem and studied Kabbalah, becoming a mystic and proclaiming himself as a Messiah. He was burned at the stake by the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. Then there's Zabbatai Zevi, who we're going to talk about here. And then we also have Menachem Mendel Schneerson, right? And he's 1902 to 1994. So this is one of the most recent messiahs. And basically, he was the seventh rabbi of Chabad Lubavitch, right? And some of his followers believed him to be the Messiah after his death, with numbers increasing since, right? And some say that he never even died. And this remains to be very controversial in Chabad Lubavitch, to this day. So, these active messiahs, there's always been this messianic longing for the return of the kingdom of God, or squaring the circle, or, and with the Masonic compass, the compass is the circle and the square draws the square. And that's the squaring of the circle on earth as it is in heaven. It's the idea of this heavenly return, bringing heaven to earth, right? Now, let's see. And then, I found Abu Isa of Ispan. He was the leader of a small revolt in the 6th century. Zonoresus of Cyrus. And then Sadia ben Joseph from the 3rd Caliphate in the Jewish Kamala, the school of Jewish Kamala, which was basically a reactionary philosophy to the rise of Islam in Jerusalem. But Sabbatai Zevi in 1648 proclaimed that the millennium is at hand, saying that, and he was going into the temples, the synagogues, and basically saying the name of God openly. And, he was he had a ban put on him. He ended up having to flee. Let's see, so he preached his desire to exchange the chains of the Talmud for the triumph of a return to Jerusalem. So Zabbatai Zevi was like one of the first Zionists, basically saying we need to go and take Jerusalem back, right? His followers began to brush aside the Talmudist ban on him, and he proclaimed 1666 of all years to be the Messianic year, right? And let's see. The Talmudists, they said that he was the greatest threat to their authority, and one of the greatest threats to Judaism ever to exist, right? So, and now his followers would engage in sexual orgies. They would curse God. They would spit on the ground, which was highly, looked bad upon. They would walk around naked. They would basically do anything against the will of God, right? And it was said, he had over 1 million followers, right? And he was married to a Polish prostitute named Sarah. And this was part of the prophecy, though, because they said the Messiah would be married to an unchaste bride, right? And we see this all through history. These kings that will go in and marry these defiled women.
Well, that's
It's
in Dune too.
yeah, yeah. It's a pattern you see through history. Simon, the magician, he married a prostitute. You just get into all these kind of Gnostic kind of.
I was gonna say, do you think the prostitute's a playoff or something?
Well, you go back to Mary Magdalene, and that goes back to media and the medicines and like these things that would use to elevate your mind for these conferences with higher forms to be able to precipitate prophecy. So when you get into the ointments and the different things that these that come out of these cults of the prostitutes through the ages,
I just think sometimes I think that's like you're telling stories with these people with prostitutes. Then you have Gilgo Beach, that's prostitutes. There's just and there was something else that I already forgot about in 2 seconds. But there's definitely I don't know. I do think there could be wordplay with that.
Yeah, well, getting into like the Scarlet Whore and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And you said he had 1 million followers?
No, not at all. Over 1 million followers at the high point.
You think he had a check mark?
What's that?
Did he have a check mark at least?
The blue check.
Yo, if you really think, and this is something I've thought about recently. I mean, I'm sure I've thought about it before, but like I actually really thought about it, and I think like, I've been questioning social media myself lately, like much more than I have, and like I was even thinking, I'm like, this is like, whenever someone's talking about cults, they call them followers.
Yeah,
and I'm like, is there much of a difference?
Yeah. Well, and just coming out of DARPA and the fact that it's free and the exchanges, you give away all your information, and it's
like, this is how many people liked what I said on my soapbox on a certain day,
right? And what you're really doing is you're confessing all of your confidential life information, not only to the public but to this overarching source that's keeping count.
Yeah. Well, I think that's, not to make it personal, but that's part of why, like, I wanted to, like, scale back on some stuff, and just feel like every time I open it, it's, like, nauseating, and I'm like, I don't know. Sorry to, 1666, you said that was the Messianic year. So
claimed by Zevi, yeah.
Claimed, yes. So that was the Great Plague in England, which was the worst since the Black Plague of 1348.
Man,
wiped out 15% of the population.
15%?
15%.
Yeah.
That's a chunk.
Yeah, it is a chunk.
Yeah.
Damn.
So he was excommunicated by the rabbis. The Polish Talmudic Council saw his failure and announced him to be a false messiah, right? And in 1666, as a result of this being the Masonic year or Messianic year, Zabbatai, he set out to dethrone the Sultan of the crown of Turkey, right? Who was basically the current ruler over Palestine. So in order to get the Holy Land or the Promised Land back, the Holy Land of the Christians, the Promised Land of the Jews, he would have to go and confront this Sultan, right? And at the same time, Zabbatai Zevi was distributing what he called world crowns amongst his followers and friends, like for when they would basically rule the world after the third temple would be built, right? And Jews everywhere began to sell their homes and businesses for return to Jerusalem, right? Zabbatai Zevi was said to be handsome, 2 meters tall, familiar with magic, a good speaker in crowds, known as a friend of the English, and he was supported by the Sufis and Kabbalists, right? And he had over 50,000 followers in Thessalonica alone, which is basically the Greek island off the coast of Turkey, right? And now, when Zevi went to the Sultan for a return of Jerusalem, he called the Day of World Domination in London, is what they were calling it in the papers, right? And in 1666, Samuel Pepys records that bets were being made on Zevi as being the king of the world, as the true Messiah, right? So that's what was going on in London while he was going to confront the Sultan, right? And so Zavi, he goes over to Turkey and he basically confronts the Sultan. And so the Sultan told Zevi that he was a fool for wishing to reestablish the Jewish state, asking who was spreading such nonsense and that he would cut his head off, right? So Zavi, Zabbatai Zevi, he told the Sultan he was the fool that was saying this, right? And he said, if you cut my head off, you will enrage the Jews of London, Paris, and Berlin, who are all interconnected, and will overthrow you, cutting off your head. And then he said, spare my head, and I will do my best to restore your honor. I will renounce my Jewish faith and publicly convert. I will say Allah Akbar and bow and accept it. And the Sultan said, he smiled and said, do it, right? So basically, Zabbatai Zevi and all of his followers, they convert to Islam.
What?
In Turkey, or Turkey, modern day Turkey, right?
And this guy's supposed to be the Messiah of the Jewish religion.
One of the rejected messiahs of the Jews.
You know what I think is interesting with this? I guess because I'm not looking at this guy at being face value of who he is. But like, I think like a lot of people, I think, focus a lot on him, that flip-flop. Yeah. And I do think it's important, I think, but in different ways, that people, oh, well, he actually, no, I don't think he converted. I think he was just somebody like, I'm going to be totally honest with you. If I was able to fake the funk and keep my head, I probably would. Who the fuck cares?
Yeah. Well, and I definitely.
You know what I'm saying? But like, if you're a magician, well, one, and you want to keep living here, and you want to accomplish whatever your goal is, you're just going to assimilate to whatever you have to make people think to get done what you're going to do.
Yeah. You ever see that old Woody Allen movie, Zelig?
Nope.
No? He's basically a character, and no matter where he goes, he kind of morphs into wherever he's at. And he's just constantly arranging and rearranging and morphing between different cultural aspects. It's a pretty interesting movie. Let's see. Zevi's followers converted to Islam en masse, and within 5 years had affected the entire state of Turkey. And ever since, Turkey has been ruled by the Donme. These are these converters of Zabbatai Zevi that are still in control of Turkey currently, right? Let's see, Zabbatai Zevi, he spoke of converting to any religion to subvert culture, right?
There you go.
In his preachings. And one of the followers of Zevi, one of these Donme, Kamala Ataturk, born in Palasonek, educated in Bethola, was a Freemason, and he helped the English amputate the old Turkish language, basically cutting off their old Turkish ties and bringing in the Latin Vulgate, right? Now Zabbatai, most say that his effort was a failure, and it left many homeless and businessless, and those Jews collapsed back into the ghettos, basically. So the first Jewish settlement from the Zevi movement in Palestine, 1666. A rabbi just moved back to Palestine, and he was arrested and jailed. He ended up converting to Islam to keep from getting his head cut off. Right. From those around Zevi, were led to believe in a Jewish Messiah who was Islamic, right? And they were basically Muslims who practice a heretical form of Judaism in secret, claiming to be Islam, right? And this sect, being the current rulers of Turkey, called the Donme, ruling for the past 5 centuries. The Donme in Turkish, the meaning is to turn or to convert, right? And I was talking to one of my friends that is into my Meta Mindcast, and she's from Turkey, and she was telling me about the Donme, and basically, there's a lot of transgender figures, and they're like, a lot of scandalous kind of sexual escapades. And so when you start looking, and that's why people talking about the Frankists and Zabbatai Zevi is because Zabbatai Zevi converted to Islam and said to convert to any thing to subvert culture in general. And Frank, when we get to him, he came across the Donme in Turkey, and that's what brought about Frankism. So we'll talk about that here in just a little bit.
Could this be like the concept of like the synagogue of Satan, basically, right? Like, sort of those who say they are Jews and are not, sort of thing.
Right. One of the possible aspects of the idea of the synagogue of Satan would be, yes, these Donme, but it could also be the Frankists, or it could also be the Ashkenazis. Many different people have pinned it on many different sects, so, and
well, something I was just thinking about, Robbie, as you were talking about this, I was even like, again, I don't know why. I guess I always bring up this Dark Ages art episode that I saw on Timeline. I guess it just must have left an impact on me, because I always think about shit from this. And, they were going on about like specific art and stuff that Christians would put on their house that would be kind of like, a symbol for other Christians to know because they were being persecuted. You draw things in the sand when you meet somebody and the other person would finish it. Right. So it's like, I feel like, every belief has been like slaughtered and killed, and people have lied about what they've believed in just to stay alive. You know what I'm saying?
And I think that's where it's important to say here, I have a lot of friends that are Jewish. I have a lot of friends that are into Islam. I have a lot of friends that are into Buddhism. I have a lot of Christian friends. It's unfortunate when people really take these ideas into themselves and become rigorous with it, and start to look down on other people, and see them as the shaitan or the adversary, and setting up this dialectic dichotomy that these certain parties, which I believe Zionism is one of them. I believe communism is one of them. I believe that these political mechanisms are set up to divide the people, to create the dialectic for change.
I was thinking a lot about these type of scenarios when I wanted to cover what we did recently, politics becoming new religion and conspiracies. Because I feel like if you think about it, back in the day, we used religion to divide people and to fucking wars over it constantly. Killing just because of your beliefs in a different name. And it's like, are we getting that? I mean, we're kind of inching there now due to political party or what conspiracies you believe in.
Well, and I think that's another thing with social media and over COVID and bringing everyone into the screens and almost creating the cult of politics through the manifestation or the mechanism of social media. And basically, depending on what's going on, you'll see ads for different things that relate to the different sides that are working as, nudges within the psychological spectrum of the feed itself. So you have to realize what the simulacra is first, and that they're trying to control the fourth world wilderness, which is your mind. They're trying to so it's when you start to look at social media like that, it becomes a completely different machination.
Really, I wonder if that's why, for example, Instagram changed their algorithm several years ago, prior to all the COVID craziness.
Right.
Remember, it used to be chronological back in the
I
day.
love that the best.
That was the best, because then you are actually seeing, like, who you follow, that you've chosen to follow, right? Yeah. Actually seeing what they put up. Now I don't see like 90% of people's stuff. I'm always seeing what the algorithm has decided I should see, right?
I remember that on Facebook. I was thinking about that. I was like, yo, I remember on social media that, like, it would actually, like, if people went to your shit or you came up, it would even be telling people, like, you'd see who's followed who, and you actually, like, saw, like, a chain of connections, too.
And it would also, say, you're all caught up. You've seen it all.
Yeah. It'd be like, you're caught up, right?
You have a sense of fulfillment and completion.
Now it's never ending, a never ending stream of consciousness. Like, it's overwhelming, right?
Yeah. So now Zabbatai Zevi, he dies in isolation, September 17th, 1676, on the day of Yom Kippur. And his wife and children, they end up moving back to Thessalonica in Greece, right? And then we have 1694, the Bank of England is established by a merchant tailor who is Scottish, William Patterson. And I'm just throwing these facts in so we can kind of have a sense of history, right? Mm-hmm. So then in 1717, the Masons publicly begin with the National Organized Freemasonry, with the founding of the Grand Lodge, with an association of Masonic lodges in England. In 1721, the publication of the Constitution of Freemasons by Scott Patterson. And then now the reason that I even bring this in is because going back, we saw that the Freehand Masons ended up in the Dionysian cults, coming forward and become the Masons. That, so this relates directly with Solomon's Temple. And we also see that the Masons use Kabbalah and the Tree of Life within the structure of the Masonic orders, right? So in 1743, Amschel Moses Bauer opens a coin shop in Frankfurt. And it's a shield, right? With a Roman eagle on a red cross. And this is they call it the Red Shield Firm, which became the Rothschilds, right? And this is basically coming out of Frankfurt in Prussia. Okay. So then let's see, May 1st, 1776, 100 years after the death of Zabbatai Zevi, but not to the day, but still, Adam Weishaupt establishes the Bavarian Illuminati with links to the Jesuits, right? Mm-hmm. So now, July 2nd, 1776, a believed Jesuit, General Ricci, who had been imprisoned under a controversy next to the Vatican in St. Peter's Basilica with tunnels, was said to have died and had a secret funeral, right? But it was believed that he was actually smuggled across to America, and he ended up at the foundation of the establishment of the United States, basically, right? And this mysterious figure shows up as they're hammering out the Declaration of Independence, right? And he gives this inspiring speech on freedom of religion. And basically, this freedom of religion is said to be the spirit of America, right? And then they proceed to, in this meeting, while this Jesuit is there, they use the East India Tea Company flag, right? And they basically take that East India Tea Company flag and they take the British little cross there, the red, white, and blue British flag,
The
off
Union Jack.
the Union Jack. There you go. They take that off the corner and they add in the 13 stars, basically creating the first American flag from the Jesuit run East Indian Tea Trading Company. Same Jesuits behind the foundation of the Illuminati. And the Jesuits already, they had been going around the world to all these different countries, setting up different social experiments within different countries. And they were kicked out of as many, if not more, countries than the Jews were, right? So the Jesuits, they're kind of also kind of milling around doing, and I believe that the Jesuits were also a big part of creating the Opium Wars. And because it was two Jesuits that basically, yeah, the East India Tea Company was set up by two European Jesuits going to Beijing to establish, quote unquote, a mission, right? And out of that, like I said, the Opium Wars. But then eventually, you have the Jesuits coming to the United States and setting up Georgetown University as basically a stronghold for the Jesuits in the United States. And Bill Clinton was, his mentor was a professor at Georgetown University, Carol Quigley, who ended up writing Tragedy and Hope, that basically lays out this plan, that we're kind of discussing here in regard to creating a one world, kind of system, right?
It's really interesting that I came across from doing like prior stuff on other people. I think when I covered Michael Myers and maybe somebody other Michael Meyer and somebody else, can't remember exactly who, but there was back in like the 15 and 1600s, I did come across noticing like occultists either themselves or being involved with people that were into like tea and tobacco and trading.
Mm-hmm.
I think somebody, I could be wrong, that was associated with Michael Meyer was also like the owner of like the East India Trading Company, which at one point was the biggest trading, company in the world.
Right. First corporation.
So it's like, now you have the means of transporting stuff.
Right.
And then like somebody was even into like actually putting, I think, like reforms on tobacco. It was actually trying to regulate it. What I'm saying? For making money, of course, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It's just like interesting how like tea, tobacco, I mean, I guess they obviously know the right things.
Yeah, that comes down to mercantilism and the spice trade. And when you start looking at the merchants who are the worshipers of Mercury, Mercury is the merker. And in the olden days, the merchants basically, as supplication to Mercury at the crossroads, they would pile up giant piles of stuff that they would bring from all their merchant travels. And if anybody touched it or robbed it, they would be like cursed, So, but there's always been this interconnection of mercantilism, spice trade, teas, wines, kind of, and the whole kind of occult aspect that runs with mercantilism, through the ages. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they're the travelers. They're able to go back and forth like Mercury the messenger, right?
Right. And they get to rather than be part of communities, they get to see how communities work.
But they're the outlier. Yeah.
Yes.
That's interesting.
And that goes back to the whole Gibelum and the three different Jewes of the Jews, Jubelum, and the original merchants that were in the Bible, that were basically, Zillah and the musical instruments and the weapons of war and getting into all that. Nice. So now 1776 was when the Illuminati, Bavarian Illuminati, was formed. 1776, July 4th, was also when the United States was founded with the Declaration of Independence, basically declaring itself independent of tyrannical rule of the British Crown, right? And there's a whole argument of the signers of the Declaration of Independence and how many signed as Esquire being, under the crown still, and, what exactly, the United States is in regard to, and it directly relates, I think, also as well to what exactly is Israel in regard to the crown, and I think it's, as we move forward with this, I think what it really comes down to is, as we've been more educated and we've gotten this rounder understanding of what reality is, and we've been brought up on these ideas of tell the truth, be just to one another, like do unto your neighbor as you would do unto yourself. We have these ideals within our heads that you shouldn't be colonizing places, So it just kind of goes against the morals that the modern world has been taught as a whole, right?
Well, exactly. Even when we were saying before, like, social media or like religion designed to turn people against each other. But if you're actually following the principles of all those three Abrahamic religions, you're supposed to be a peaceful person. You're supposed to be nonviolent.
Right.
Buddhism, same thing. Exactly. Turn the other cheek. So it's like,
oh, the Q-Tards and the Patriots are looking for a reason to start shooting motherfuckers.
Right? It's like,
I hate to say it, they're looking for a reason to have the justification to kill somebody, and then when you actually see their insides spilled out, and you have to smell that and see the destruction you just did to somebody, I guarantee you this is not going to be like fucking Duck Hunt like you expected it to be.
No,
this is all going to be fun and games. No, it's going to be very horrific.
I like how Robby mentioned before. You said that the quote "freedom of religion is the spirit of America."
Yeah,
which I think flies in the face of what a lot of maybe more like conservative Christian patriotic types consider America to be. And I often bring that up in discussions. It's like, actually, no, America has always been like rebellious. America has always been founded on that spirit of like against something, right? You can't hold us down, like we're free, right? It's like people think it's like a Christian country, it's a conservative, and I'm like, actually it's not. That's why it was started.
But getting into that, as far as Jacobism linked with Illuminism, the Jesuits linked in with the Illuminati, right? When you get into the major tenets of the idea of world revolution that was going on at the time, right? You had this idea of against all crown and altar. They wanted to bring every altar down and every crown down and basically liberate all of mankind into a free republic kind of utopian idea of, all the machinations that have come out of that, from anarchism to Marxism to, but really importantly, if you look at the tenets of the revolutions that were going on at the time, right? You have the idea of liberté, equalité, and fraternité, right? And if you link that, because these are the trinity of machinations in order to facilitate the mind to a state of rebellion, right? So you have liberty, which means you're free to go anywhere, do anything, be anything you want to be, right? And that's how it is in America. Everybody tells their kids you can grow up and be whatever you want to be, right? So then you have equality, right? Which means everyone has equal access to everything, regardless of your mental fortitude. The world should be open to everyone to roam, to play. So money and business and power, like it's equally open, right? And then you have fraternity, which is basically the brotherhood of all mankind as one, right? And then if you compare that to the modern things that they're pushing, being diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Liberty is very much equated with diversity in the fact that it goes in all directions. It's very diverse, right? Equality is different than equity. Equity means everybody gets the same. Equality means everyone has access to the same, right? And then you have inclusion, which is very much like fraternity, right? So they're using the exact same terminology in these younger generational movement against the older generational movement that they use to facilitate world revolution, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I just even ask the bigger question, like, is disobedience good? Is rebellion good?
Right. And
I don't know.
who's the original rebeller?
Lucifer.
Lucifer,
Satan. Exactly.
And
Yes.
yeah, and that gets into Illuminism and Illuminati and the light bringer, and this idea of and that's the thing. Once you illuminate the minds of men, and like Prometheus, bring that fire,
Tree of knowledge, right? Or what? I forget what tree. What was the tree? That was the bad tree, but yeah, exactly.
Well, and that's the idea also of in the Garden of Eden, when they take the fruit and eat the fruit, and they come to know good and evil. They come to know the dialectic.
Yes.
Well, like, if you think of most religions and even spiritual, I think, ideas, let's say, we're trying to look at the same way as taking the word rebel and looking at it that it could actually mean multiple different ways.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, a lot of times I do think that we could be possibly the fallen angels or whatever. Let's say we're already screwed up, and basically we're told that through Catholicism and Christianity, we're fucked from the start. But there's these things you can do to get into heaven when you die, which would basically kind of be rebelling against what's offered to you here.
Right.
So couldn't you technically still be rebelling but trying to get back into heaven?
Right.
Well, rebelling against the world would be obedience to God.
Right.
Basically.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying sometimes when I think the word rebel is tossed around, people always automatically think it's against God. Maybe it's against the situation to get you closer to God.
Right. Well, it's all a double-edged sword. All these words have both sides of their meaning. That's the knowledge of the good and the evil. That's the dialectic.
You fuck up and you end up in a shitty situation. You're like, I don't want to be here anymore.
Yeah.
Well, now you got to do it to get back to where you want to go.
Right. So now in 1783, Moses Mendelssohn, who is a Sabbatean Illuminist, is the father of secular Judaism. And basically he creates the idea of the Jewish national idea, opening the door for Zionism, calling the movement Helonim, as secular or against religion, right? So Zionism at its base is Helonim, against religion.
Non-religious.
Right? Non-religious, right, right. So now that was in 1783, 1785, a member of the Bavarian Illuminati, a Catholic priest, Johann Jacob Langs, was struck by lightning on his horse, and in his satchel are documents that they found for the French Revolution with a list of black Illuminati lodges or subverted Masonic lodges that were under the control of the Bavarian Illuminati, a list of the high government and judges who were in their pocket, and discussions of the Illuminati on assimilating Freemasonry rather than setting up their own units, right? So in early America, the first third party was the anti-Mason party. And there was this big belief that the Illuminists had infiltrated Freemasonry. And when you get into the French Revolution, in two different places, I've found the Grand Masters of the German lodges that they brought in, and they were both Illuminists. Coming from these black lodges in Germany, setting up the French Revolution. Right?
I could be wrong, but Robbie, was Joseph Smith also running in that same election? The first time they had the third party?
Yeah.
I think Joseph Smith was actually one of the other three parties running.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, too, because he was Mason, and Mormon, and I do think he had Masonic ties, or at least his father.
Well, when you get into Mormonism, they
did. That's right. They admit that he was a Mason. I forget. They even
And the way that it's set up, they are the new Masonic religion for the New Age. Basically, with their temple set up exactly like Masonic temples.
So similar.
Yeah, exactly. So now, in 1786, Jacob Frank, here we go into the Frankism, right? He was considered the second Sabbatean Messiah. And he encounters the Donme traveling in Turkey, and he becomes very rich and moves to Frankfurt, and he converted to Catholicism, right? So then you look at the Vatican having these bans on Masons and basically being involved, and it's just interesting how overlapping the Jesuits, the Illuminists, the Masonic orders, the Zionists, they're all kind of interplaying in a slipstream with one another, right?
Mm-hmm.
Spiderweb.
Jacob Frank, he claims to be the reincarnation of Zabbatai Zevi, and as well being a reincarnation of the patriarch Jacob himself, right?
Yeah, I love these people with the reincarnation stories.
I know. Well, it's just like Timothy Leary saying, I feel like I'm the reincarnation of Aleister Crowley,
Or even Aleister Crowley, I thought he was a reincarnation of Elvis Lever. Love you.
Exactly.
I mean, what's bad is like
Trump is King Cyrus, etc.
The fact David Wilcox thinks he's a reincarnation of somebody just makes me doubt anybody now. Whoever would say something.
Yeah.
Because he's such a scam artist, I would assume everybody else is lying.
I believe in different types of reincarnation.
Yeah. Just shit like that.
But yeah, that's a whole nother matter. So now Jacob Frank's father was a Sabbatean. And in Poland, he was expelled as a heretic, right? And he as well said, if salvation could come from purity, it could also be achieved through sin. And Jacob Frank as well promoted sexual orgies. And I think this has ties in with the little cult that Rasputin ended up coming out of and going into, overthrow the Russian Tsar and his family, right? I'm looking for that link in there. But just based on the lifestyle and the different things, these things speak to one another. You shall know them by their fruits, right? So let's see. He preached revolutions and revelations. He defecated on himself as part of his Holy Trinity.
I think that I might have forgotten about.
Yep.
I did not expect to hear that this morning.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, I know it was 2 years ago, but I don't remember that.
Right. He went against the Talmud as not being part of Jewish doctrine, and the some rabbis sided with Frank, and they ended up burning some 10,000 volumes of the Talmud.
Wow.
These Frankists. And just as the Illuminati had subverted the Masonic lodges, so the Rothschilds were also getting in and starting to subvert the Masonic lodges. Let's see. And as far as, Rothschild's links to Jacob Frank and Frankism, there's been several writers that have said that, this Rothschild or that Rothschild has said they were a Frankist, even some of their own internal memoirs, right? But I think that also shows why we have Jacob Rothschild with Maria Abramovich standing in front of the, Lucifer summons his minions painting, it just kind of all rolls into itself,
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Okay. Yep. Covered that. So, in 1760 in Frankfurt, Amschel Rothschild establishes his banking empire. Like we said, they are Ashkenazi, and they become a noble banking family. In 1789, Abe Burrell, in his History of Jacobism, this is a really good set of books, but it's really hard to read because it's so old and all the S's are F's.
Oh.
So you kind of have to adjust your mind
That's
as
funny.
you're reading it, right? But it covers the depths of the subversion of the Masonic lodges, um, for the for the sparking of the French Revolution. It covers the subversion of the education of the monarchs, the different types of propaganda, dialectics, and the what do I have? Oh, and how they brought in the liberal philosophies to be taught from the top down.
I remember
right?
that. I remember that actually.
Yeah. So Larousse, in his book on Illuminism, from the La Grande Dictionnaire Universal du, what is it? 18 no 19, he says, the Illuminati did not disappear after the last century. They are still to be found in Germany, England, and Russia, where they have formed a queer sect in which castration is one of the features of initiation. The taste for supernatural, the passions of the marvelous, constantly urge these mentally unbalanced men, in whom the imagination is fanaticized, to throw themselves into fanatic visions, with which constitute Illuminism, right? And basically, Hughes de Payne of the Knights Templar, he was a member of this sect, and Fahette, were both members of this sect in France. So this is where we get to the French Revolution, May 5th, 1789. And like I said, the Black Lodges from Germany came down. The Jesuits were actually going around the streets of France and the homeless, and they would basically stick a funnel in their mouth and stuff down this gunpowder concoction, which would turn them totally insane, right? And they didn't care if they lived or died, but basically, so you would have these raving maniacs that were super violent roaming around on the streets, right? And there were pallets of bricks that just showed up out of nowhere. We've seen that in Chicago, right?
Like the
I saw
same
that out
exact
by me.
playbook.
Same playbook. That's what, yeah,
Holy
exactly.
jeez. Like
Exactly.
we've got the trans movement, we've got cultural revolution happening with castrating people, like wool, gunpowder, putting stuff in people's bodies to make them insane. Sounds very familiar.
Yep. And all the products that we put on our bodies, what's in the food that we're eating. You know, America, they have a lot of stuff allowed that's not allowed in other countries.
They call it
Yeah.
the
You know?
great experiment, right?
Yeah, it is the great, what is it? The great petri dish. You know. And then you had Louis de Saint, who basically was the founder of St. Louis in the United States. He was going around in the French Revolution, basically passing out gold to like get the people hyped up, right? And then let's see, 1798, from the German Bur, B-U-R, meaning a small dwelling, we get the name Bauer, right? Which is in Ashkenazi means neighbor or fellow citizen. And this was the Bauer family of the Red Shield firm, right? And he sent his sons out at this point. His first son, Amschel, stayed in Frankfurt. His second son, Solomon, went to Vienna. His third son, Nathan, went to London, and Nathan was said to be the most clever. And Nathan was basically 21 at this point, sent to London to set up this international banking system, right? And then Carl went to Naples, and Jacob went to Paris, right? And then in 1799, Napoleon, after the French Revolution, right? He emancipates all the Jews. He introduces the ideas of liberty into the culture. He removed laws allowing the Jews to leave the ghettos. He ended Jews being sold as slaves. He allowed the synagogues to begin to be rebuilt. He allowed the Jews to own property. And he leaned on Lord Rothschild for his financing, in return promising them Jerusalem and their return to the promised land, right? So, and at this point, the French they sent a ship over to Jerusalem to basically say, we're one of the lost tribes of Israel, and we're here to, like, basically reclaim the Holy Land or reclaim the Promised Land, right? So, and they were seeking to establish a French settlement in Palestine, justified by the moral force of the Bible and the idea of Abraham's Promised Land, right? So then we have 1804, Napoleon becomes Emperor of France. And then, so there's this whole thing with Napoleon going to Russia. Then he was exiled to Ebla. And then he escapes from Ebla and he recruits a new army. And basically, this is when the Napoleonic Wars are going on. And at the same point, he's getting money from Lord Rothschild because of this allowance of all the freedoms that he's allowed and the promise of the return to the Promised Land. And so Napoleon, when he's going into Prussia, right? William of Hesse basically is running from Napoleon, and he gives the Rothschilds, what was it, 550,000 pounds of his money, right? Because he's afraid he's going to lose it to Napoleon. And so the Rothschilds are taking William of Hesse's money and giving it to Napoleon to fund the exercise of going in and all these Napoleonic wars, right? So, this is the beginning of the Rothschilds beginning to fund both sides of the wars and help both sides, right? Outside of Nash. So we're looking at the beginning of the international mercantilism and the international banks as well here, right? Which stretch into modern times.
Mm-hmm.
And later they end up giving it back to him in Spain, but there's no recorded documents. There's only a couple paintings that document this fact. So then let's see. Now in 1816, right? Mary Shelley they're at this castle and they have a writing contest, and Lord Byron's there and they're smoking opium and doing all these different, probably hash and opium and kind of hanging out. And Mary Shelley, she writes Frankenstein, right? And some researchers say that this is a warning of the spread of Frankism, right?
Shit.
Yeah.
Frankenstein.
And basically Frankenstein, the monster, being the assembly of the parts of Sabbateanism, Illuminism, Masonry, Jacobism, and the Jesuits, all as a single monster.
Damn.
Right? So Mary Shelley may have been one of the first conspiracy theorists.
Is it Frankenstein or Frankenstein?
Yeah, I know. The Mandela effect. But yeah. So now, and you were saying about women in true crime, Nick.
Yeah.
She was onto something. Jeez.
So,
I hope she won the competition with that.
Yeah, I think she might have actually.
What's the winner?
So now we go to 1840.
Real quick, I did remember because of what you just said here. Remember before when I was talking about the prostitutes and forgetting, and I did say Gilgo Beach. You just said what, Mary Shelley? I for some reason was thinking Mary Jane Kelly right away. That was my first thought, and then I'm like, oh no, that's not her. But Mary Jane Kelly was one of the prostitutes in Jack the Ripper, which is what I was going to get at. That's more Masonry and Jack the Ripper, and you mentioned them before too, and it didn't even click with the Jews and the Jubelums.
Of royalty falling in love and having a hidden marriage and all kind and bastard offspring. And,
it's just like with that, I think the prostitutes are an occult symbol.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. Especially in certain schools of inversion.
Yeah. Sure.
It's so now 1840, Lord Palmerston, the Prime Minister of England, who had commanded gunboats in the Opium Wars, he was the Grand Master of the Freemasons at the time, and he announced in Parliament, now is the time for the Jewish for the Jews to return to the Holy Land, which at the time was said to be a surprise to the Jewish faith. Like they were all like, "What?"
Okay.
Yeah, and he had a bunch of political pressure to actually retract his statement in the parliament, right? And because everybody believed it would lead to war, right? And Palmerston, Lord Palmerston, he believed there should be a world religion called Restorism, which was basically a precursor to Zionism, a religion that wasn't religious, right? And they sent survey teams from Masonic lodges to determine what areas to take control of in Palestine, right? And this is 1840. So, and then Lord Palmerston took advantage of the Russian Jewish infighting at the time. And basically, the Russian Jews were the first migrants to Palestine from 1880 to 1910. Basically, these Jewish immigrants becoming 25% of the population of Palestine at this point, right? And in 1841, the Zionist court and crown are funded by the Rothschild banking dynasty through the Bank of England. So let's see. And this is when, in 1841, the Restoration of the Jews colonial articles were passed in the British Parliament. And then, let's see, in 1849, this is when Reuters news service begins, right? And Reuters news service, who is the standard of news now, that basically everyone gets, you know, for the 5 major existing media conglomerates that are left since Bill Clinton allowed, you know, all the media companies to merge. Reuters is the standard of news. And Reuters is originally taking over for the Rothschilds carrier pigeon service. So Reuters is the official news service of the Rothschilds, right? Let's see. Now, then we have 1854, July 4th, the Knights of the Golden Circle begin. And then 1860, Albert Pike begins the 33-degree system of the Scottish Rite Freemasonry, basically selling degrees, right? And then in 1865, Albert Pike, he's involved in the founding of the Ku Klux Klan as a terrorist organization to control the black vote of the South. And then within the 33-degree system, right, we have within the Scottish Rite 33-degree system, we have the patriarchal cross, right, which is essentially the double cross. It's the vertical with the regular cross with the smaller one above it, right? So the double cross, right? So called because it is born before the patriarch in Roman church, right?
I feel like there's so many different variations of that cross.
Where
you see it tossed into a lot of things.
Yeah. And it's the insignia of the officers of the guard encampment of the Knights Templar of the United States and all its predecessors of the 33rd degree in the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. So that is the cross of the 33rd degree, the double cross, right? So then we have 1859, November 24th, is the publication of Darwin's On the Origin of Species. And the subtitle of that is By Means of Natural Selection or the Preservation of the Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. So then, let's see, 1884.
That reminds me a lot of like the Origin of a Species thing.
Yeah, that's Darwin's
that's the same.
Origin of
Okay,
Species.
Right.
Yeah. But it's of the favored races in the struggle for life. So that's the part that's the part everybody always leaves out, you know.
Did you listen to Typo Negative at all?
I've heard them a little bit.
I think that was their first album. I think was Origin of the Feces, and I think it was a play off of that book.
Yeah.
And it's like, how
Um,
many people probably even caught that or even do that?
well, and just the fact that it was the Huxleys that were Darwin's bulldog that brought the idea of evolution into the modern vernacular, which brought about the idea of conscious evolution, and we are still evolving, and we haven't reached our highest evolutionary form yet. So it's a political tool in a lot of ways, at least the way I see it, right? Um, so now then we have in 1884 of February, Reuters news service in 2014 reported that the Rothschilds family paid Karl Marx to pen Das Kapital, right? Basically the Communist Manifesto. Um, and Karl Marx, me being a Marx, I've dug deeply into this. But the Marxes, before Karl Marx, his father was actually Rabbi Levi, right? So here we have, the Marx family or the Levy family converting to Marx and then precipitating through the Rothschilds the Communist Manifesto, right? And let's see, in July 8, 1937, the New York Times says the Rothschilds linked to Marx and the Nazis. German history terms the two brothers in blood and in spirit, right? And that's New York Times, 1937, July 8, if anybody wants to look that up. And some sources say that Marx was the third or fourth cousin of Nathan Mayer, Lord Rothschild. And while most sources you read will say that he was paid by the League of the Just, a Christian communist international revolutionary organization linked to the founding of and becoming the Communist Party itself.
The League of the Just, like the Justice League.
Like the Justice
League. That brings a whole new meaning to
right?
Justice League.
Right,
shit.
So 1862, Moses Hess, who employed Karl Marx, was an early prominent of Zionism, creating the idea of labor Zionism. And labor Zionism was basically the idea that the Jewish faith were going to show just how brilliant their work was and how pure their religion was. And through these righteous, pure forms that they came forth with, the world would want to help them reestablish the holy land, the promised land for the third temple, right? So it was about using the Jewish religion in a positive manner to facilitate the turning, right? And Moses Hess was a follower of Spinoza and Hegel, basically the Hegelian dialect, right? Who Marx basically worshipped, studying under Bruno Bauer, who was one of Hegel's students, right? And Moses Hess was a German journalist who wrote the book Rome and Jerusalem, right? Which becomes very relevant in the foundation of Israel. And it's basically a promised land, sort of utopian kind of philosophy, right? But Marx outright rejected Hess's utopianism. Hess saying in his works that Jews will always be homeless unless they have a homeland, right? So Moses Hess, he creates a society for the colonization of Palestine, to which the Rothschilds fund, right? And basically they set out to rebuild the Temple of Jerusalem, fuse all religious cults into one religion, which is they call it fusionism, right? Utilizing Freemasonry to this end, right? Incorporating the Masonic lodges into a British Israel World Federation for governmental distribution, right? So he talks about taking control of the Masonic lodges and using them secretly to facilitate all these means, right? Creating a secret society, subvert. So when we get into the, anti-Mason party, and we get into, no Masons in the Vatican, and we get into, all these machinations of all these things folding over on one and trying to devour one another for power, basically, right? So I got a big long quote here from Moses Hess, but I think I said basically, unless it's the whole idea that they need a homeland to be able to facilitate, what they do, because that requires them a soil and to be stable, to basically be fruitful like a plant. You have to have the soil to plant the plant in so that you can reap the rewards of the planting, right? So that's the whole idea of Moses Hess in his Roman Jerusalem. So in 1865 in Frankfurt, Rabbi Herschel, in his book Humanity as a Religion, says to found a company for Jewish colonization in Palestine, to acquire land and prepare it for settlement. In that same year, they set up the Palestinian Exploration Fund, being a corporate project to create Israel, right? In 1871, now, this is a touchy subject for a lot of people. We have the infamous letter between Albert Pike and Giuseppe Mazzini. Are you guys familiar with this?
Yes.
Yeah. So basically, this letter was behind the Italian Risorgimento, which is basically the Italian unification for independence. And one of the liberal and nationalist ideologies that helped spark the French Revolution, essentially, right? So on August 15th, 1871, in this letter, it reads, "The Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the agentur," which, looking that up, that is the office or business of an agent of the Illuminati, right? He says of the Illuminati in the letter, basically being Jesuit linked, right? Between the political Zionists, being the secular, non-religious Jews, and the leaders of the Islamic world. The war must be conducted in such that Islam and political Zionism mutually destroy each other. Meanwhile, other nations, once more divided on this issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economic exhaustion. We shall unleash the nihilist and the atheist and provoke a formidable social cataclysm in which all its horror will clearly show the nations the effect of absolute atheism, the origin of savagery, and the most bloody turmoil. Then everywhere the citizens obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries will exterminate those destroyers of civilization, and the multitude, disillusioned with Christianity, whose direct spirits will from that moment be without compass or direction, anxious for an idea, but without knowing where to render its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, right? Brought finally out into the public. This manifestation will result from the general reactionary movement, which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time.
Bam.
Sorry so long.
No, that's very relevant.
So, but this letter was said to be a forgery, right? It's said not to be a real letter between them. So a lot of people say it's just a tool that basically set up Italian independence and sparked the French Revolution. But this letter between Pike and Mazzini is very much like, as we're going to get to here in a minute, the Wise Elders of Zion document that Henry Ford was actually printing up and passing out with the sale of every new tea bucket he sold.
Oh,
So
Wow.
yeah.
Doesn't the letter also detail like the First and Second World War?
Yes. And I was just reading the Third War because it's
Mm-hmm.
relevant to the current state of
Yes.
politics and world that we're living in now. But yeah, if anybody wants to go back and look at that letter between Pike and Mazzini, he does detail how they'll spark the First War, how they'll spark the Second War, and the Third World War.
And the letter
yeah, I do know.
was
I
written
totally
when?
forgot about that.
Let's see.
Like
The letter was
1870?
1871.
I have heard of this. Yeah, it goes into like the Third World War. I just
Mhm.
totally forgot that this was the letter, but I have
Right.
heard of that now.
Right. So then we get 1882, Baron Edward de Rothschild, the Baron, or as some call him, the patron. He funds the first permanent settlement in Israel called Rishon LeZion. And this is one of the settlements that was attacked on 710. Right.
Ooh.
So then we get to 1883. At age 19, Nathan Birnbaum, an Australian writer and journalist, formed Kadamia, the first Jewish Zionist student association. And in their publication, coined the terms Zionist, and Zionism in 1890. And then in 1892, they coined the term political Zionism. And Birnbaum plays a prominent part in the first Zionist Congress and becomes the Secretary General, right? And then in 1883, the second permanent settlement in Israel called Petah Tikva was funded by the Rothschilds. And then we have 1884 in Baraboo, Wisconsin. We have the foundation of the Ringling Brothers Circus, right? And the brothers of all these circuses generally refers to the fact that they were all Masons, right? And you have the three rings, which are the first 3 degrees of the York Lodge, right? The ringmaster of the circus, he wears the top hat, which only the Grand Master wears during the Masonic meetings, right? But the first show that the Ringling Brothers bring out is advertised, and you can go look online at some of these flyers and posters and the art. I love the old circus art. But it's basically a show featuring Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, dating back to the first temple, right?
Come on.
Yeah, so here we see the Masons basically, carrying forward these ideas through the tabernacle tent that is the circus that travels around like Moses and puts on this esoteric philosophical show, initiating the masses into these occult mysteries of ancient times.
Goddamn, Robby. This is why I love story time with Robby Marx. See,
that makes an interesting idea about why there's a tent in
right.
Minerville. There's a tent in the room.
Right.
I
So
never would have thought that before about the tent.
And like you kind of are initiating yourself into looking for illumination or whatever.
Right. With these ancient stories of these grand masters and, yeah. So now we have 1885. Rabbi Jacob Frank wrote, "We are no longer a nation, but a religious community, and therefore we do not expect a return to Palestine, nor a sacrificial worship under the sons of Aaron, nor a restoration of any of the laws," right? And Jerry Rabbo, in his book, The Untold Life Stories of 50 Jewish Messiahs, says, although Jacob Frank was born 50 years after the death of Zabbatai Zevi, he deserves to be regarded as Zabbatai's true successor. he extended the paradoxical teachings of Zevi that the coming of the Messianic age had transformed sexual prohibitions in the Bible into permissions and even obligations. According to Frank, engaging in sexual orgies became the means to purify the soul from its sins. Debauchery became therapy. Frank convinced his followers that the only way for their special form of Judaism to survive was for them to outwardly become Christians, just as the Dome had descended into the world of Islam. So this is where we have, this idea coming from, that basically, they mask themselves. They, like Zelig, that movie I was talking about, how they, wherever they are, they become that thing to subvert it from the inside, right? So Frank even claimed, we already said that, to be the reincarnation of Zabbatai. And Jacob Frank, creating the religion of Frankism, said to have been instigated by the Lurian Kabbalah, which we talked about first, as far as following the script to bring the Messiah. He believed that the biblical God was evil, holding many Gnostic views. He rejected every moral law and commandment, saying that society must be totally destroyed and then rebuilt. And he talked of all kinds of different blood ritual and sacrifice and drinking blood as necessary rituals, right? So, and the Jewish authorities in Poland excommunicated him, and he, having a following of over 50,000 ex-Jews, and as some call them, the quote unquote, within the conspiracy, crowd, the crypto Jews, right? And Sabbatai Zevi was said to have 20 times the followers of Jacob Frank. But Jacob Frank's cult would gain followers in the European royalty, in nobility, and in the richest of the banking classes, right? Eva Frank, who was his daughter, became the Scarlet Lady, serving. I know, right? It's the same. You see this pattern just over and over, serving as the central figure for his sex rights. And even after his death, she continued to run these sects in Offenbach and Poland.
Yeah, I think I remember that from when I think Lux covered her. I think she was she had a freaky side to it for sure.
Right. So let's see. Jacob Frank said everything that has ever been till this day has been done so the seed of the Jews will be maintained and that the name of Israel not be forgotten. But now there is no more need for commandments or for prayers, but only to listen and to do and to go on until we come to a certain hidden place. So how are we doing on time here? Okay, so 1887, the Rothschilds financed the establishment of De Beers, basically the diamond company, right? Through Cecil Rhodes, who would set up his own country of Rhodesia, along with bringing apartheid to South Africa, right? Which would become the model that Israel would use for Gaza, right? And this, if you go into the personal letters between Lord Rothschild and Lord Balfour, they talk openly about this, right? As far as, we like what's going on over there in Africa, let's bring that same model to Gaza, right? Basically, this is detailed extensively by Richard Grove in his works, which, if you listen to Grand Theft World, the podcast, what's Alex Jones say? This is not a video game, folks. So let's see. And in 1894, they began to distribute propaganda postcards, advertising for the Jews to come to Palestine, with men holding these giant grapes. And in the corner, there's the Star of David with a 33-degree symbol inside of it, right? So tying the Masons to the Zionists, it's quite peculiar. So then 1896, we have Baron Hirsch, who founded the Jewish Colonization Association. He acquired 125,000 acres for the settlement, with Baron Rothschild's transferring his land holdings and 15 million francs to the association. And this later would become PICA in 1924, the Palestine Jewish Colonization Association. And the Rothschilds, in regard to setting up Israel, right? They paid for the country, they funded the government, they financed the Knesset, which is the unicameral legislative body of Israel. It was Dorothy de Rothschild who paid for and funded the founding of the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court building. And basically, they have had a consistent influence in Israel for some 300 years, right? In 1896, considered to be one of the most important texts on Zionism, Theodor Herzl envisions the founding of an independent Jewish state in the 20th century, encouraging Jews to purchase land in Palestine in his Der Judenstaat, which is basically the Jewish state. And it was published in Leipzig and Vienna as a proposal for the solution. And he ended up meeting with Lord Rothschild and putting forth his proposal. And Lord Rothschild shot him down, basically because from a business aspect, it went against what his colonization efforts already were, right? Because they looked at this as a business investment opportunity, right? Setting this up in the name of the crown. So let's see, 1879, the first Zionist Congress held in Basel, Switzerland, with 208 delegates, 26 press correspondences, chaired by Theodor Herzl. Let's see. Oh, and Theodor Herzl, he had the idea that Palestine didn't necessarily have to be the promised land. He was looking at Madagascar, Ararat City in the United States. I think it was in Texas. He was looking at Uganda. He was looking at the USSR. Different places in Africa, but all that fizzled out by about 1903. And outwardly, all the rabbis were against creating such a homeland, and that's the thing. You have the Ashkenazis. If you talk to the Sephardic Jews, they've always said that the Ashkenazis were they were the Zionists. They were the non-religious Jews. They were, so the whole thing with Zionism was always Ashkenazi, according to the Sephardics. But you have the Mountain Jews, you have the Hasidic Jews, you have the Sephardic Jews, you have the Zionist Jews, you have the Ethiopian Jews. So much like Christianity, how it has fractured into, the Lutherans, the Baptists, the Presbyterians, the Catholics, the Eastern denominations, very much the same kind of thing with Judaism. So when people are saying, oh, the Jews this, the Jews that, I think it's more power and money than anything, Yeah. So, now in 1900, let me get a drink here.
Go for it.
Yeah, go for it. Always make sure I got one.
So, 1900, Cecil Rhodes dies, right? And Nathaniel, the first Lord Rothschild, is the executor to the Rhodes will, and he sets up the Rhodes Scholarship. Right. So the Rothschilds set this scholarship up with Rhodes money, and they initially funded Rhodes going into Rhodesia, setting up the diamond mines. So basically, this is all kind of in the spectrum of the Rothschild, but nonetheless, when we look at different people that come out of this Rhodes Scholarship, right? We have George Estabrooks, William Fulbright, John Olmsted, Chris Christopherson, the folk singer in America, Wesley Clark, the general, We have Bill Clinton in 1968 coming out of it. Rachel Maddow is a Rhodes Scholar, and hundreds of others. Ronan Farrow, who is Mia Farrow's son, he's a Rhodes Scholar. He's a journalist now, right? And then 1901, we have the foundation in St. Louis of Monsanto.
You know, there was some things like you just mentioned right here, like these schools or these places, like the Fulbright. You mentioned Fulbright. Like me and Lux, when we did part 2 on this whole thing, this topic, and unfortunately, I think like the second part really didn't get as much play as the first one, but I think it was really, really important because you can start following schools that are associated with people. Like Fulbright even has a scholarship.
Right.
You know, that's a scholarship. And like we ended up seeing like it's really weird how you will get these schools that look like they're very much Catholic. Right. They'll have this whole beautiful setup, this church that they have there, but then they're sending people to Goethe University.
Yeah,
for a
in
year.
Prussia.
Where you go on that website and the first thing you see is Marx.
Oh, yeah, and Goethe.
How is this making sense? Because like then if you follow what these people do, all far left shit. So how does this match the church that you have at the school that you just that they're at, that you sent them away for a year to come back to?
Right. So getting into Goethe or Goethe, right? Gothe. The Germans pronounce it Goethe. But he's believed to be an Illuminist.
Yeah, going back to the subversion thing, right? Like just blending in.
Yeah, I'm reading I've got a Goethe set of 10 books, and I'm just at the end of the second book right now. But he's the one behind Faust and the Faustian Bargain. He's the one that wrote the story there, The Magician's Apprentice, which becomes the Mickey Mouse story in Fantasia. Goethe he's behind a lot of modern machinations.
We even showed in that episode too, AOC was on that site because she was working with working families, which is like partners are promoted even on that site. Like on the bottom, sometimes sites will be like, show like links to other sites that you can go to that they're partners with or they're whatever. Yeah. So like they were, and they were showing like there's fucking AOC right there. So like she ties back to this.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. So the Fulbright, right? He's a Rhodes Scholar, and the Rhodes Scholarship ties back to Rhodes and the Rothschilds, right? And Rhodes set up the Round Table groups, which became the Council of Foreign Relations, which in Cecil Rhodes' will, he says that it's a secret society to bring America back under the fold of the British government, right? And since Jimmy Carter, every cabinet position by every president has been filled by these Rhodes Roundtable group people. For every president, every cabinet position, they've all been in the CFR. So the CFR is part of the Rhodes machination, dating back to the Rothschild funding. So this all ties in, And I hate to be getting all conspiracy and everything, but all I'm trying to do is show the history. Right. So now we get to 1903, maniacal laugh. In the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. And this is said by many to be the most damaging piece of propaganda to quote unquote the Jews that has ever existed, right? And when they call it the Elders of Zion. So this is Zionism. So this relates to the creation of the state of Israel. And, tying in with the Masons, tying in with the Crown, facilitating and voting in Parliament to allow this colonization to happen. We really have to question what the state of Israel is if it's not a religious function. You know what I mean? By its own definition, right? So let's see. The Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion creeps into society in Imperial Russia. and it's first distributed by a gypsy fortune teller named Madame Clink, right? And basically, if you trace this back, it was actually serialized in the Banner, a newspaper in Russia, sparking an international Jewish conspiracy to take over the world, right? As secular or as Sabbatean within Russia, right? And this basically sparked a lot of anti-Jewish propaganda in Russia. And pogroms in Russia started to take place. Thousands of Jews were killed and fled, with Jewish Catholics and Protestants seen as a fifth column against the Russian monarchy, right? So not only did they think it was the Jews, but they thought it was the Catholics and Protestants as well, right? And originally, this document, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, was copied. It was written by Joseph Brofman, who basically was a Jew who had converted to Orthodox Christianity, right? And it was copied from a book by Maurice Joly called The Dialogue in Hell Between Machiavelli and Montesquieu. And Joly ended up getting 15 years in prison for releasing this book as an attack on Napoleon III. And but Maurice Joly had copied this from a novel by Eugene Sue in his Les Mystères des Peuples from 1856. And this pamphlet, basically in the courts, the Wise Elders of Zion, was declared as a forgery, but not a fake, right? While other sources tie it to Borges Fontaine against the Jansenists in France in 1604, which was written by a Jesuit against the Jews, having mentions of Norvis Ordo Seclorum, the New World Order, while in Russia, with this gypsy distributing this pamphlet, this gypsy fortune teller, Madame Clink, at the time, Russia was completely open to the Jesuits. So they were just able to freely do whatever they wanted. So a lot of people link this to the Jesuits as far as a propaganda tool, right? So then in 1909, now we have the Scoville Bible. You guys familiar with the Scoville Bible? So it began to be circulated with notes by an American Bible student, Cyrus Schofield, right? And this became the popular dispensational text at the beginning of the 20th century, based around the Protestant version of the King James Bible, with the apocryphal books in it as well, right? Basically what Schofield does is he has this, it's called chain referencing, right? And he basically walks you through these ideas in the Bible of Zionism specifically, and the idea of the return of the Jews to the Holy. This is what sparked Zionism in the Protestant movement in America, right?
Oh, I see. That's why the tie is so strong and they're so like pro all the time.
Right. And they say that when you look at Zionism throughout the world, only 1 in every 20 Zionists is actually a Jew. Right. Most of the Zionists you have are white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males, WASPs. So and it flows within the Protestant community specifically because of the Scoville Bible. And what he did in relating and showing through these chain references, you know, the ideas of Zionism. So we're seeing how all these things are kind of being put in place as bricks to facilitate the movement towards this idea of this colonization by the crown, right? Let's see, in 1910, J.P. Morgan, as a Rothschild agent, is part of Jekyll Island, right? And in the cover of night, using first names only, they basically go into these cabins. And if you get into this Jekyll Island, it's an old Native American like settlement. And from what I understand, they were like really scary, and they were kind of cannibals, and they did a lot of human sacrifice. And in one of the cabins there on Jekyll Island is actually one of the old altars that they used to sacrifice on. But let's see. And this brought about the Bretton Woods Agreement, which basically brings about the Federal Reserve Act in 1913, setting up the US dollar, right? So then 1913, the Rockefeller Foundation is formed as being charitable. And John D. Rockefeller was financed by the Rothschilds for the Standard Oil monopoly. Let's see. In 1914, World War I begins. 1915, the first transcontinental phone call. Woodrow Wilson, basically, right, calls Alexander Graham Bell. And then the second call that he made was to the Jekyll Island Club.
No way.
Yeah.
Wow.
So October 25th, 1917 is the Bolshevik Revolution. Of the 17 council members to overthrow the Russian Tsar system against war and imperialism, Trotsky is, a lot of people will say that the Bolshevik Revolution was sparked by the Jewish faith, right? Or they were basically all Jews. But when you get into it, Trotsky was the only Jew, right? And the other 16 were either Jesuit trained or Jesuit priests. So, and again, the Bolshevik Revolution, it was secular, it was internationalist. It was seen as a Jewish communist ploy, right? So again, laying the blame off on the Jews, right? And with the Romanov dynasty falling March 2nd, 1917. And then in that same year, 1917, we have the Balfour Declaration, right? And from Lord Balfour addressed to Lord Rothschild, this is still during World War I, while the world was in chaos, for a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, established November 2nd, 1917. Put in the press November 9th, 1917, creating a colony, a British Crown colony in Jerusalem. Later, it is found this land was promised to 3 different groups, being the Jews, being Islam, and the Saudis by the British Crown, right? And this ties in with Lawrence of Arabia, going in and setting up the Saudi family and getting the oil for the British Crown at this time as well, right? And then in 1918, after World War I, Great Britain takes control of Jerusalem and the surrounding regions until Israel would become an independent state in 1948. So basically, the British go in and rule over the area until 1948, when they turn it into Israel, right? In 1920, Churchill, in his Zionism and Bolshevism, envisions a Jewish state backed by the British Crown to combat Bolshevism and the internationalist secular Jew as a homeland given over to end the Bolshevist threat of world revolution, right? So that was Churchill. And then in 1920, the Times of Britain declares the Elders of Zion as a fake. 1920, the Nazi Party is formed February 20th. 1920, Trotsky says that the struggle behind Zionism versus the Jew is the struggle for the soul of Judaism. This was after Trotsky had basically come back to New York, and he was writing propaganda. He was very much against Zionism, Trotsky was. He did not like the Zionists at all. And now we have 1921, the Council of Foreign Relations begins based on the Cecil Rhodes Roundtable system. Let's see. Activating the Cecil Rhodes Secret Society to bring America back under the wing of the British Empire. I think I have like 5 more pages and we'll wrap it up. 1922, the League of Nations adopts the Balfour Declaration, recognizing Israel as a nation. In 1924, Frankfurt Zeitung newspaper declares the Elders of Zion as a fake. And then in 1933, Hitler in Germany, in regard to him wanting all the Jews out, right? It kind of was a culmination of the British Crown setting up Zionism and Theodore Herschel, trying to get all the Jews to move, and then Hitler wanting the Jews out of Germany. He actually begins what they call the Havara Agreement, right? And this is signed August 25th, 1933. And basically the Nazis were paying to move all willing Jews to Israel and Palestine, paying to move their families and all their assets, right? In the book, The Transfer Agreement by Edwin Black covers this extensively. And Goebbels even ended up striking a coin for this Havara or this transfer agreement, right? And this German coin has the swastika on one side and the Jewish Star of David on the other side, right? And after the fact, you've heard the whole conspiracy that Hitler was a Rothschild.
Yes.
Yeah, so that basically can be traced back to propaganda by Intel to basically disable the modern neo-Nazi movement as far as the spread of Nazism. But if you go back into the most recent biography on Hitler, it's a giant, thick book.
Was the Star of David the Star of David yet when you're talking about that coin?
Yeah, I had.
Hey, you know what I'm saying? Like, is it looked at as that yet before? You know what I'm saying?
I mean, well, the Star of David was the Star of David as far as the line of David in regard to the seal of the prophets, and that coming from the goddess through Melchizedek into the line of David. And even Muhammad calls himself the seal of the prophets, referring to this 8-pointed star as well, right?
Wow.
So yeah,
I guess what I'm getting at, like, that's on the coin before it's on the flag, isn't it?
Well, and also that letter between Pike and Mazzini talks about Zionism before the word Zionism was coined.
That's
So
stuff.
it's very wishy-washy with all this stuff, right?
Interesting.
So then we get to 1933. Edward Dugdale is the first one to translate Mein Kampf or Hitler's My Struggle into English, right? And he was Arthur Balfour's niece's husband, right? So at the same time they're creating Israel and Zionism, they're taking Mein Kampf and translating it into English here in 1933 as a political tool to create dialectic is what I see out of it, right?
Yeah.
But it's funny that Lord Balfour, put forth the idea of creating the Israel state, and then it's Arthur Balfour's niece's husband who basically translates Mein Kampf into English, right? And then the newspaper saying, but his wife, a prominent Zionist and niece of Arthur Balfour, and they wish to avoid publicity. So,
unless that particular relative who translated Mein Kampf was just against what Balfour was trying to do. I don't know. Yeah. But it could be, like you said, like just trying to set up a dialectic. Because I think a lot of people maybe don't realize that, like, Nazism, part of its founding was like anti-Bolshevik.
Oh, yeah.
Not necessarily like anti-Jewish.
Well, it
It
became
sort of like
anti-
morphed. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, as it went on, and I think then Goebbels was going around getting all this esoteric information, so
Yes.
the story started to morph and shift, and went from the Bolsheviks, and that's the whole thing, blaming the Bolshevik Revolution on the Jews when it was mostly Jesuits, But all these tropes have constantly, and again, back to Abraham and Isaac and the finding of the scapegoat. The Jews consistently over and over and over have been scapegoated and used
Jesus
as
was the scapegoat. He was a
right.
Jew.
Exactly.
Right. Mhm.
So now also in 1933, Germany began teaching the wise elders of Zion in some of the schools to some of the kids, even right. And in 1938, the Nazis began to exile the Rothschilds banks and in Austria. Rothschild was held by secret police, and basically they negotiated with Hitler a $21 million ransom, right? So that Rothschild could leave Austria, right? And this is the largest ransom ever paid for a single person in history.
Oh.
So 21 mil.
Should have went for the 22.
What?
Should have went for the 22.
Right? I was like,
almost.
damn, why?
Now, right? So now in 1944, we have the word genocide introduced into the vernacular, right? And it's a mix of Greek and Latin, which my wife hates. She hates it when they mix Greek and Latin. But it's genos, which is race or tribe, and side, which is killing. So that was in 1944 by a Polish lawyer named Raphael Lemkin in his book Access Rule in Occupied Europe. In 1946, the Zionists, they bombed the King David Hotel, killing 93.
Wow.
And the Brits basically had Zionist documents that were against the crown, and the bombing killed British soldiers and Palestinian children. It was the largest terrorist attack ever in the world at that time, planned and executed by Ben Gurion, who would become the first prime minister of Israel, right? So when they say we can't deal with terrorists, how many times do we see these terrorist groups rising and coming into power? Let's see. So 1947, the UN grants parts of Palestine to the Zionists. From 1947 to 49, Palestinians are made refugees, removing them from their own ancestral homes, confiscating these lands, and the Jews the Zionist Jews call this the Nakba, right? Or maybe it's the Palestinians, but nonetheless, this is the Nakba, where they basically exile all these Palestinians from their land, and where they also precipitate creating an open air concentration camp modeled on the South African model, brought by design through, again, Lord Balfour and Lord Rothschild's personal letters. And they called it, in their letters, they call it a colonial state enterprise, right? So that's how they refer to the creation of Israel. As far as
it's always been seen as like a money-making venture from the beginning.
Seems to be.
Which we're still seeing currently, right?
And yeah. So in 1950, Zionists begin to call Palestine as Hafrada, which means half apart, which is literally the word apartheid, right? So they've created an apartheid system, an open air concentration camp that is self-described through these documents of the founders. Let's see. I'm going to skip over some of this stuff, but we're starting to see that, like we talked about, it's a colony. and it's set up that way, and it is against the moral values that most people have been instilled with in the modern world. And we've been trying to move away from colonization. We've been trying to, and they say, oh, one state solution, a two-state solution. If they want to have a solution, set up a democratic republic and let everybody vote. And that's separate from the crown. I think all this, these crown colonies, it's always been a problem, seemingly.
I've wondered if a lot of them are also, besides just doing shit to control and manipulate the people that you're, whatever you have there.
Right.
Could some of them just also be, which I think is where Nazis type stuff starts coming in. Could you also be running all sorts of different types of experiments? Doesn't even have to be drugs. Could be psychological.
Right. Well, and that's,
maybe that's why this country has certain things that the other ones don't, because this one's getting fucked with the chemicals. Let's see what happens.
Right. But also when you look at RFK Jr. recently talking about Israel being a foothold in the Islamic world for intelligence purposes, when you get into all the Silicon Valley, like technology moving over to Israel for global surveillance purposes, and, Uncanny Valley as far as that book. And then, you start looking at, what was it? 1968, June 5th. Palestinian Sirhan, who was a mind control Manchurian kind of candidate. He assassinates RFK, and this is due to this Israel-Palestine conflict. So we continue to see this fomenting into all the machinations of government and how they're setting up all these laws where you can't talk bad about Zion, and it's the difference between what is Zionism and what is Judaism, and are they the same thing, or is this but back to as far as the founding of the Third Temple, which is back to Solomon's Temple, which is what this is really all about. We already have and I get into, I'm not even going to go over it because now we're starting to get into modern politics and it becomes very hairy. But as far as 1977, that Labor Party goes under, and we have the rise of the radical right, which is basically what's his Netanyahu. Is part of this right party, but in the 70s, let me find this. Yeah, and I get into the Khazars, and you can probably go find out all about that somewhere else. But it's and then also out of Israel, as far as Mossad, you have the rise of the Epstein-Maxwell stuff and the blackmail of all the politicians, and bought and sold, and like they can't open up these lists. One of the, I think it was the congressman from Missouri that said we're trying to open up these files, but the people that are in Congress are inhibiting it because it will expose them. So it's this whole game of compromise that we're having to play, and that blackmail, that intelligence, going back to the Crown, going back to MI5, MI6, CIA. It's the intelligence game and the devil's chessboard per se.
Wow.
Then I have so 2013, Israel announces the Third Temple begins construction, laying the groundwork for the rebuilding. The Guardian in the UK in 2015, Jewish activity launch appeal to breed the perfect red heifer, right? And then 2022, from Texas to Israel, red heifers needed for temple. They arise with 5 perfectly red heifers. And you sent me that whole thing, that podcast on furry creatures.
Blurry creatures. Yeah, they just had a crazy episode about the red heifer.
Right.
And apparently, some of the red heifers from 2013 are still in the running to be sacrificed because there's a prophecy that the Jewish people need to sacrifice an unblemished,
Right.
perfectly every single hair is red heifer to institute the third temple.
Right.
And that may happen this Passover, which is
Right.
April 22nd.
So, and on that same note, right,
Yeah.
March 25th, 2004, CBS News, they say, what these red cows from Texas have to do with war and peace in the Middle East. Basically, this article is talking about how now is end times, various prophecies of the third temple. But these, apparently, one of the reasons for the 10-7 attack was because they had already taken three of these heifers, these red cows, over there.
Yes, I heard that that was possibly a reason for things to be heating up now.
Right.
You know, is that the Islamic side is like, nope.
Right.
Right. They're trying to prevent it. I don't know. It's a possibility.
But when you get into the various prophecies of the third temple, you know, it gets into holy war. 2/3 of the Jews must perish. The goyim as slaves. The Antichrist sits on the temple of God. You know, and then that the ashes of that last heifer that were in the cave with the Dead Sea Scrolls has to be mixed with the ashes of this new heifer to reactivate. You know, we've talked about reactivating these portals or these altars before, and it just gets into a whole, you know, really bloody kind of conflictual thing, you know. And again, I go back to, you know, because I have no prejudice against Jews, against Islam, against, you know, anyone. And because, you know, if a person follows their religion, you know, you shall know them by their fruits. And you know, if they're peaceful, they're peaceful. But you know, it's so, and basically that is, you know, right up to modern day times in the effort to rebuild this third temple, to bring heaven to earth.
Wouldn't it be crazy if this episode comes out, you told the whole story, and then the heifers get sacrificed this April, and we see the third temple come about in our lifetime? That would be crazy.
Well, if they do rebuild it, I'm just going to assume, based on the patterns and all the other temples, it's going to take them 7 years to build it.
Apparently, like I don't know, from what I recall in the Blurry Creatures episode that I listened to, everything is ready to go.
I know.
It just was a matter of finding the perfect heifers to sacrifice.
Right.
It's so crazy.
And that brings us into the Masonic or Messianic age, you know, with the hope of the, you know, of the Jews for the coming Mashiach or Messiah.
Yeah. Well, I find it super interesting too, because we've got, of course, got the eclipse coming up. April 8th, waking the X.
The two eclipses.
Yes, the two eclipses culminating in the second one coming up this April. Also, I'm very into like the prophecies of the illumination of conscience, which I just, it's all like coinciding. And I'm like, oh my God.
I know.
Big stuff gonna go down soon this year, in the coming years. I don't know, but it seems very ominous.
And you do have some eschatologists, basically, you know, the people that clock all these times, saying that 2026 will be the year for the sacrifice, and that 2033 will be the Zoroastrian end time of, you know, the Judaistic calendar.
Damn.
So getting intense,
right? I think this is such an important series for people to listen to.
Yeah. And like I said, you know, I have no prejudice. Most likely my family, you know, were Jews at one point. And I know a lot of people of the Jewish faith. And, you know, they're some of the most beautiful people I know. I mean, you know, so it doesn't speak to crown function governmental intel and colonization, and genocide, which seems to be really pushing its head forward now, But yeah, I don't want to get too. This is already way too political. So
that's your disclaimer. You're just going over the history. I mean,
this is the history.
The history is the history. What can we say, right? Every group has done very crazy things throughout history. So
for money and power.
Yes, exactly.
And we have to question. We have to question.
Exactly.
Question
no one is
everything
exempt from that. Nobody's exempt from that. So.
And
you can't help our histories, just showing you where it's going. I mean, that's all you're really doing.
Right. So, and that's it. That's the Temple of Solomon.
Dang. Good job, Robby.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was amazing.
Yeah, that was really a good place to end it too, really, is up to that point. I think maybe in the future we'll look back and see how the story maybe continues.
Let's see if the red heifers thing goes down.
That is really interesting, because I have been seeing stuff about that again, and I'm like, that's creepy shit.
Jim the Ninja, right? I was talking to him, and he said within his studies, there is the necessity of sacrificing the red heifer in Eastern theology as well, for the precipitation of the turning of the cosmos. Like the going back to the idea that these sacrifices are essentially the blood that is the grease that keeps the gears of the cosmos turning.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Damn.
So it's fun, crazy, like a lot of people don't want to touch it, but I think it's relevant history that, I tried to cover it in a really, open manner, like trying to show the good and the bad of all the sides.
Absolutely. I think you did a most excellent job, Robby.
Well, thanks.
Yes, thank you very much. I really appreciate you spending all the time that you did in these 5 episodes. I mean,
now I can get back to my other studies, man.
There you go.
You can get back to reading your Goethe, or what did you say?
I've got a Goethe set I'm in. I've got a Tolstoy set I'm in. And I'm also finishing up the second book of The Decline and Fall of Rome, along with a bunch of other, I got stacks of books.
So good.
Like books.
Yeah, books I'd like to read. I'm just too busy.
I know.
Right.
I find another rabbit hole to go down with, and I'm like forgetting about books.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, Robby, let everybody know where they could find your stuff again, real quick, please.
Yeah. You can get all my links on my link tree, which is RMARX, all one word, and that'll pull up everything from my Patreon to my podcast to my Etsy to my Insta and Facebook and Twitter.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And I will have your links in the bottom. And Teresa, let everybody know what's up with you.
Yeah, so if people want to check out my stuff, same thing, Spiritual Gangsters podcast. Click on my link tree. It'll have my also small Etsy shop and all kinds of other things, social media, blah, blah, blah.
Awesome.
Yes.
Thank you both again very much for spending time to cover this series. I know it was many weeks in the making, and I appreciate it. And like something that Teresa was, I think she really nailed it when she said people should really like pay attention and kind of like follow the series, or maybe some of the things he had covered, maybe look a little bit deeper into other things. But I do think there's a lot here if you've been listening through the whole series. I think you will see like threads going through it.
Right.
Very interesting, very well done, and I can't thank you enough. And that is the end of this series and another Occult Rejects. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.